Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Erin Centeo and I am the Program Coordinator for Physical Education, Physical Activity Leadership. Today I'm going to talk to you about some obesity statistics here in Michigan and talk about how obesity is actually a really big deal, and it's something that as physical education and health teachers or someone that's going into the field of physical activity that you need to be really aware of. So the first thing I wanted to mention was this idea of what obesity and physical inactivity and sedentary behavior, because those all go together, look like in Michigan. So this data comes from the YRBS, which is high school data, specifically from Michigan high school students. And then there's also Detroit-specific data on this slide as well. So this data is from 2015. And I just want to point out some key things. So there's about 16% of students in Michigan that did not participate in at least 60 minutes of physical activity on at least one day a week. So the national guidelines say that people in general should be participating in 60 minutes a day of physical activity every day. And so when we think about 60 minutes of physical activity, that's kind of the standard, the gold standard, that we should be doing that every day. Well, 16% of our students aren't even doing that one day. And if we look at our students in Detroit, 25% of them aren't doing at least one day a week of 60 minutes of physical activity. When we look at 5 days a week, so participating in 60 minutes 5 days a week, there's actually 54% of students in Michigan that do not meet that criteria, and that's about 72% in Detroit. So again, that national recommendation, about 76% of Michigan students are meeting the daily recommended 60 minutes, and that's about 84% in Detroit. So we can see that physical activity, or the lack of physical activity, is really an issue across the state, but it's more prevalent in Detroit, or just in general across the nation in urban areas. So 68.5% of students did not attend physical education class on one or more days in an average week. And that was actually lower in Detroit. And this isn't really surprising given that the high school state requirement for physical education is one semester. And so to see that 68.5% did not attend physical education class, that's about right. Like if you take physical education your freshman year, that's probably who they may or may not have filled out that survey. About 22% of students across the state watch television 3 or more hours a day. And this is not television that was related to school. And that's about 31% of kids in Detroit. And then it's 41% of kids use computers. And again, this is non-academic screen time, and that's about 34% in Detroit. So then if we look at obesity in general, 14.3% of students reported being obese and 16% overweight. So that's about 30.3% of students across the state that are overweight or obese. And that number is actually about 44% of Detroit students reported being overweight or obese. In regards to breakfast, there's a lot of information out there that talks about the lack of eating breakfast and its relationship to obesity. There's about 17% of students who did not eat breakfast, and 68% reported skipping breakfast at least once a week. 43% of students reported drinking soda pop one or more times per day, and that was higher in Detroit at 55%. And then if we look at some of the other health things that are related to obesity, which includes drug use, about 59% of students had had alcohol or had tried alcohol. 34% had used marijuana. And again, these are all high school statistics. That's higher in Detroit at 55% having alcohol. Lower in Detroit at 55% for alcohol, and about 42% for marijuana. One of the things that's on the rise is students taking prescription drugs without a prescription, and we tend to see those everywhere, but at the state level, it was about 16% of students overall had taken prescription drugs without a prescription, and that number was a little bit lower in Detroit at 12%. So one of the things that's really important for you to understand is the benefits of healthy eating and physical activity. So healthy eating and physical activity have lots of benefits on both adults and children. And in general, those benefits come in three different areas. So we have physical benefits, emotional benefits, and cognitive benefits. The physical benefits are things that you are probably most familiar with. So students that eat healthy and are more physically active have a reduced chance of obesity, and they reduce their risk for chronic disease later in life. Now, another thing that you might be familiar with is that students who eat healthy and who are more physically active get these emotional benefits to their body. So students often have reduced feelings of depression and anxiety, and it also promotes an overall psychological well-being. One of the things that has become more prevalent that people have become more aware of in the last couple of years is this idea of the cognitive benefits that physical activity and healthy eating have for students. And so in cognition, we're talking about improved attention in the classroom, memory, verbal ability, and then academic achievement, which can be measured by test scores or just in general with GPA or grades. So there's some specific data out there that talks specifically about what eating healthy does for you in the school. And what they found was that by eating breakfast and by eating a healthy breakfast, kids improved their attendance, they had fewer sick days in school, they reduced their tardiness, they had higher cognitive function and higher academic achievement, and then they just felt better. They had decreased anxiety, depression, and hyperactivity. When we look at physical activity, it had all of those benefits, but it actually goes in deeper about the academic performance piece or academic achievement. So they found less unexcused absences, fewer discipline issues. Kids were able to concentrate for a longer period of time. And then there's this really big link between fitness and physical activity and achievement in reading and math. And so that's really important for us to understand. And this is information that you might be able to use to help advocate for your physical education or physical activity programs at your school. So I'm not sure if any of you have seen these slides before. I like to present these slides because they're really powerful to the visual eye and just understanding what's going on in the brain. So these come out of Dr. Chuck Himlin's lab, which is called the Fit Kids Lab, that used to be hosted at the University of Illinois. And basically what they found was an acute bout of physical activity had an impact on cognition of children. Now, an acute bout of physical activity means we perform physical activity and then we sit down and we have some type of a cognitive test. So what they did here was they had 20 students who sat in a chair and then they did a cognitive test. And that's the first picture that you're going to see here on the screen. And then they had the same kids come back on a different day and they walked for 20 minutes and then they had them perform a cognitive test. And what they saw was the neurons in their brain were firing so much more, which is essentially a precursor to academic achievement or cognitive function. It's actually measuring executive function with the EEG. So they saw this neuron activity. So then the next question was, well, this is an acute bout of physical activity. What does physical activity do to the brain if it's for a prolonged period of time? So they decided to do a research project on what we call chronic physical activity. So this is physical activity over a long period of time. So what we have here is what we call an intervention group, and these are kids that participated in an after-school program that was mirrored after quality physical education. And that program started off with a healthy snack, and then they went into doing physical activity, and that most of it was in the moderate to vigorous physical activity nature. So their heart rate was up, they were moving quickly, and this was for the entire school year that they did this after-school program. Then there was a second group that was called the waitlist group, and this group was actually a control group. So this group got the intervention the second year, but the year that they were the control group, they just went home and did normal activities like they would have done if they weren't enrolled in the program. So at pretest, what they saw was that the children in both the intervention group and the control group were about the same. I didn't mention this before, but these are actually overlays of children's brains. So this is not one child's brain, but an overlay or a composite of all of them. And so what they found was that there is no significant difference at pretest, and that's really good. You don't want to see differences at the pretest. But what they found after the year period of time is that the students that were in the intervention had a significant increase in cognitive function, while the waitlist kids, the kids that just went home and did their normal activities, actually saw a decrease, which led to significant differences between the kids that went through the intervention and the kids that did not. So this has great implications for programs of physical education and physical activity, because what it's telling us is if our kids are participating in physical activity for a prolonged period of time at moderate to vigorous intensity, these are the types of outcomes that you might be able to see on academic achievement or cognitive function of students. So this is really exciting. Now, there's a couple other things that I wanted to mention that are really important for you to understand. So the relationship with fitness is really strong when we talk about academic achievement. There is a direct relationship with children's fitness and their academic achievement. So if a child is more fit, they are going to have higher scores of academic achievement. That's what the literature is telling us. The literature for physical activity says that the more physically active a child is, the more likely they are to perform higher academically. But it doesn't have that direct relationship just yet. The other thing to understand is that adiposity, or fat on a person's body, actually inhibits cognitive performance. So even when we're controlling for fitness level, the more fat that you have on your body is actually working negatively or causing you to have a lower cognitive performance. And that really plays into our severely obese and our obese students, because even if they are someone that we might define as someone that's fit but still obese, that adiposity is really inhibiting their cognitive performance even more. Another misconception that I want to make sure that you don't have is that just because our students look physically fit does not mean that they are physically fit. So it's really important that we use fitness testing such as the FitnessGram or the Presidential Youth Fitness Challenge to be able to measure our students' fitness, because our skinny kids sometimes are the least fit in our classes, and it's important for us to understand that. Then it's also important for you to understand that you want to be able to provide as many opportunities as possible for children to participate in physical activity to help them become more fit. Because the more opportunities that they have, hopefully they'll be able to find something that they like, which will in turn lead to more physical activity and in turn better fitness. So what does this mean for schools? Well, one of the things that's being talked about now is this idea of a change of culture within and around the school. So it's really the goal to make physical activity a common happening in the school building. And one of the main movements that's leading to is something called comprehensive school physical activity programming. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later.